Good afternoon. Today is March 26th. Welcome to the bill hearings for the Ways and Means Committee. I'd like to call the soon-to-be birthday gentleman up front. Let's give him a big round of applause. My senator. Hey. And if you notice, half the committee's missing because I think half are in B&T and the other half are in Triple E. So.
May I, Madam Chair? Okay, so this is Senate Bill 1027, which I think you have the cross file on this. A lot of discussion about this bill, the history, the legal background, but and the case that was brought forward that brought it to our attention. The bottom line is that this is about defining who can request an appeal of property taxes. And to me, it was a very simple issue. You put all that cases aside, the legal issues aside. The question is, what do we want as a state? What is our value? What do we think is the best thing that should be done? And the simple answer in my mind was, we don't need folks who don't have an interest in the property to be requesting appeals of other people's property. As simple as that. I don't think it gets any more complicated. We could go through all the legalese, but I don't think it's worth it. I think we have to decide what we want and what we think is right. And the thought of having the ability for people to be asking for appeals all across the state on properties that they have no interest in, for whatever means they may have, mischief or otherwise, just doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it was the intention of the legislature for this ever to be the case. Interpretations have come down over the years. I think the interpretations are pretty clear that it wasn't our intention to do that, but at this point, it doesn't matter. We have a moment here, and I think the answer is, from my perspective, pretty simple. We shouldn't allow this to be happening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 1027. Senator Giles, Senate Bill 6.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 6 is a cross-file to its House Bill 63. This bill just closes a loophole in the property tax exemption for disabled veterans. Essentially, it would just say that those veterans who are 100% non-permanent disabled are also eligible for a tax exemption. Previously, there was just a gap in the tax law. This would fix it. It is not identical to the House bill version. We would actually prefer the House bill version. The Senate bill ended up taking a MACO amendment. I really don't think it's necessary. It would require it would allow the counties to opt in. This is a small amount of people, prefer the House version, and I would ask for a favorable report. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 6. Senator Hayes, Senate Bill 138.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee. Senator Antonio Hayes, for the record, presenting Senate Bill 138, which should be in the same posture as HB2. I guess imitation or duplication is the best form of flattery, and that we took this very small local bill and made it a statewide bill to give all of our jurisdictions the ability to address vacant properties in their jurisdiction. I ask for a favorable report for Senate Bill 138.
Okay, any questions? Okay, that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 138. Senator Hayes, Senate Bill 417.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 417 received unanimous support from the Senate. I believe this committee had heard the cross file of this bill, whatever it was. This just simply gives the ability for the election board administrator to do an evaluation of the local boards. I ask for a favorable report for Senate Bill 417.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 417. We don't have, I'm just looking up, sorry, Senator Klausmeyer, yep. Come on up. Senate Bill 25.
Have John cluster just in case there's a question.
And I had the honor of serving with him on the Judiciary Committee. And he, I remember, told me I'm a bad man because he was on the SWAT team.
I ran the SWAT team.
I said, you were a bad man.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the House and Ways and Means Committee. I'm here to present Senate Bill 25, which is a follow-up to enabling legislation we passed over a decade ago to allow a county to grant a property tax credit for fallen or disabled law enforcement officers. When we passed this original legislation, we did not include the spouse or the injured work officer who later passed. This legislation is intended to provide that if the injured officer passes before his or her spouse, the spouse can continue to get the tax break. The original legislation also did not consider increases in property taxes that can occur through the years. Again, this legislation fixes that issue by stating that if the tax imposed on a property increases in a given year, the value of the credit will increase proportionately as well. The Senate amended the bill to make it clear that this is only enabling legislation. A county will still have to decide whether to implement the tax credit. Thank you for your consideration of Senate Bill 25, and I ask for a favorable report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was involved in the original bill and it was an oversight. Just recently, I got a couple calls from spouses that their husbands or wives had passed away and they were hit with the tax bill, which probably later in life, most of these people were in their 70s now. They didn't have that tax bill for all those years and now all of a sudden they get hit with it. And we realized that myself, and it was a Prince George's County Democrat that co-sponsored this bill back in probably before everybody here was even down here in 2007. So yeah, we are old, right?
Speak for yourself.
So this does now include the spouses or significant other of the fallen officer or injured officer. Again, we fixed it. There's only 12 or 13 counties that do it, and my county and Baltimore County is one of them. That they were the first county to do it. I urge you to go back and get your counties to do it because it is a break for officers that are injured. They can't work anymore, and they get a tax break. So it is enabling legislation. MACO agreed with it once we made it enabling legislation. It does increase the amount. Everybody knows our tax bills are going up and up and up, and it does include the current property tax, whatever they were getting back then. And it was just county taxes. So there is no cost to the state at all. It's all county taxes.
Do you mind, just since you served in this body, so I think the only people here were myself and Hornberger and Buckles not here, shocker. Yeah, and Ebersol, you just tell everybody your background a little bit in terms of your police background and then.
Sure. I went on the police department in 1973. And I get giggles and a lot of people say, well, I wasn't even born then, or I was not even in high school, or, but I went on the police department, rose through the ranks, and eventually I worked in I worked in patrol, I worked in detectives, and then eventually I took over the SWAT team for Baltimore County, where I retired from the SWAT team. From there, my wife and I opened up a small business, embroidery, custom embroidery and screen printing. And then I got an opportunity in 2003 to run for office and got into the House. Lucky enough to sit next to Delegate Atterbury in Judiciary for a while. I used her knowledge as an attorney. I was just a cop. She used my knowledge as a cop. So we had a lot of banter back and forth back in the day. From there, the governor asked me to go on the parole board. which I have 30 days left and I'm retiring from the parole board April 26th. After 43 years in public service, I think that's enough. You know, I've had enough, so I'm going to stay home and let my wife boss me around at that point. From yes, dear, I've learned that a long time. I've been married 49 years, so I learned that a long time ago. So, but Senator Klausmeyer was my senator. We worked together well through the years, even though we were with different parties. We worked together very well.
Let me just say though, one time he ran against me and I won. I have to
Yeah,
say that.
That is true. That is
Yeah.
true.
But, you know,
But I
if
was
we-
forced into it by your buddy Al Redmond.
But that's, but I feel.
Now, folks.
No, but we have gotten along quite well over the years and it's no big deal.
I was actually her personal driver going to all the different events because she would call me up and we lived in the same neighborhood. So I would pick her up and take her to all the different Boy Scout events and community events and whatever. And we still get along very well. So,
Nice.
but it was a pleasure sitting next to you. And I saw that I taught you well. Look where you've made it to,
Thank
you know?
Well, always good to see you. I enjoyed sitting next to you too. And we appreciate the bill. Any questions from the committee? Delegate Ebersol has a question.
It's not a question. It's
Yep.
just that I think Senator Klausmeyer can say that about so many people.
But she beat
One
a lot
day
of
he or
people.
she ran against me and I won.
You're right about that.
But off the humor, just we would consider, would want a favorable report. Gotta say that.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 25. Going back to the top of my list, Delegate Fair, are you going to do Senate Bill 769, Frederick County Senators Bills, since your Frederick County Senator couldn't appear?
Let's not put me on that spot. I love my senators. I think we were just all talking about them a moment ago. For the record, Delegate Chris Fair here presenting Senate Bill 769 on behalf of the Frederick County delegation. The Senate Bill 769 is in the exact same posture as House Bill 740, which both passed this committee as well as the floor unanimously. Happily take any questions.
Any questions? Okay, no questions. Thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 769. I don't see Senator Kagan. Is anybody from her office here? Okay, moving on. Senator Carter, is someone from Senator Carter's office here? Okay, anybody here from Senator Hester's office? Come on up, please. Senate Bill 978. And it says, do you have two people coming up with you? Ben Yellen and Craig Hallman, come on up. Yep, okay. And I should note that, but everybody sees him, that Jared Damaris is with us. Should anybody have any questions?
Good afternoon, everyone. Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Damien Lang. I'm Senator Hester's Chief of Staff. Joining me is Dr. Craig Holman from Public Citizen, who worked closely with us on this bill, and Jared DeMarinis, who's worked closely with us as well. Thank you for your consideration of Senate Bill 978, Election Law, Synthetic Media Disclosure and Regulation, which will regulate the use of deepfakes to retain the integrity of our elections. The use of deepfakes in elections is a growing threat that has already impacted the 2024 presidential election. The expansion of new video and image editing, artificial intelligence or AI technology allows malicious actors to easily produce images, videos, and audio recordings that imitate electoral candidates. The rise of deepfakes used throughout campaigning and elections contributes to the spread of misinformation, leading to a lack of trust and the undermining of the truth for voters. Already in this election cycle, we have seen the use of deepfakes for the purpose of election interference. Last year, a deepfake video purporting to depict Hillary Clinton endorsing Ron DeSantis was shared on social media site X. It was obviously satire, but the technology and the accessibility of it at this time shows that it's only going to improve in terms of effectiveness and it's spreading. Our office sent a copy of a presentation that we shared in the Senate with the members of the committee with a copy of the video attached there within. I recommend you take a look at it. It is funny, but it is scary in terms of the practicality of its application. Although the video is not very convincing at this time, it's a good indication of where AI created videos are going and their potential to increase in quality. So more recently, AI generated robocalls with President Biden's voice were used to discourage voters in the New Hampshire presidential primary election. In response to this robocall, the FCC declared that all calls made with AI generated voices are artificial under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. This ruling, which makes effect immediately, makes voice cloning technology used in common robocall scams targeting consumers illegal. However, this only covers telecommunications, not social media, which this bill hopes to apply to. So in response, we've seen a number of states begin to act. Minnesota has prohibited using AI generated content within 90 days of an election. California and Texas have passed laws that make it a criminal offense to use generated and deceptive videos using deepfake technology. New Mexico passed a bill in February, which defined materially deceptive media and created a crime violating their Campaign Reporting Act. In Kentucky, lawmakers are working on introducing a comprehensive bill that establishes regulations on a wide range of emergent technologies. The use of deceptive deepfake technologies within that concept. So a lot of states are doing this. This is our attempt at regulating a burgeoning technology. SB 978 passed the Senate Education, Energy, Environment Committee on the Senate floor unanimously. As amended, the bill does 5 things. It requires those regulated by the State Board of Elections to disclose when they publish, distribute, or disseminate synthetic media akin to a watermark on their publication materials. It also establishes specific disclosure requirements. It requires those regulated to publish the original content that was manipulated to generate the synthetic media on their website. This is in the case where a photo has been doctored by AI. They are required to publish the original photo that had not been manipulated by AI in conjunction with the manipulated content for transparency's sake. It also enables the State Board of Elections to seek an injunction of the publication and distribution of synthetic media that violates the requirements of this bill. And it also adds a violation to existing election law established under Section 13-602 with a $1,000 fine. So in summary, SB 978 takes a balanced approach toward regulating the use of deepfakes in state elections, which otherwise will undermine the credibility of campaign content among voters. This bill is an essential first step, providing guardrails while upholding the First Amendment's protection of free speech. So for these reasons, I respectfully request a favorable report on SB 978 as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members for letting me make a statement in support of S 978. The 2024 election is shaping up to be the very first serious deepfake election that we've ever had. Artificial intelligence has been around for a while, but it's never been as refined and deceptive as it has become this year and this election cycle. When artificial intelligence is used to depict a candidate or an office holder saying or doing something that he or she never did, it's entirely computer fabricated. That's what we call deep fakes. And we've seen many of them happening already, in even at the federal level and at the states as well. What is really unfortunate is deep fakes are so new that they're not subject to regulation under campaign finance laws at the federal level in most states, not even disclosure. When a deep fake is used depicting a candidate saying something that he or she never did, it doesn't have to tell us that, hey, this really didn't happen. I've been pressing the federal government, Congress, and the Federal Election Commission to come out with some reasonable regulations, transparency regulations, not bans on deep fakes. Just let voters know that this is just computer generated. And Congress is not acting very quickly. We're going to hit the 2024 election with no regulation, no disclosure requirement at the federal level. The place that are kicking in and picking up the slack are the states. So far, there are 9 states that have passed disclosure laws. And hopefully Maryland will become another one.
Thank you, sir.
Vice Chair
Oh, hit
Wilkins.
the, oh, there you go.
Thank you
Okay.
very much. Members of the Ways and Means Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 978. My name is Ben Yellen. I'm the Program Director for Public Policy and External Affairs at the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Our team of legal researchers during the interim studied state legislation related to artificial intelligence, and we were pleased to brief members of the Joint Committee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Biotechnology on emerging issues in AI. One of our areas of study included looking at state statutes regulating the use of deepfakes during political campaigns, and not just in blue states like California, but also red states like Texas and Kentucky. Lawmakers have recognized the need to institute regulations and restrictions on the dissemination of deepfakes. These governments have recognized that a functioning democracy relies on access to accurate information about candidates and campaigns. Because of this rapidly advancing technology, deepfakes have become easier to produce and more convincing than they were even a couple of years ago. It is incumbent upon policymakers to ensure that when somebody sees a video of a political figure, that is indeed that political figure speaking, and those were the words that were spoken. SB 978 would put Maryland at the forefront of this effort. One thing I appreciate about the bill, and I know this was reflected from earlier speakers, it strikes a balance between protecting civil liberties and constitutional rights, while maintaining concern about the integrity of elections. This bill is not a ban on even political deepfake videos. It is simply a disclosure requirement that balances First Amendment rights to free speech and expression with the need to protect the integrity of our elections. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Okay, Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and a lot of amendments here, so I want to just circle back on what the bill does now as amended. So if I want to use AI to benefit my candidacy, and I can give you a for example, is that going to be prohibited? Does it need the watermark disclosure? What does that look like?
As long as you have disclosed it within the parameters established within the bill, it will not be prohibited.
Okay, and you said that would be a watermark on said video. What exactly would that look like?
It is a disclosure statement that essentially says this image has been altered or modified through the use of computer programs to display an event or image that did not occur in reality. So this would be for a fabricated image.
Okay, so what about a video?
A video, it would have a rolling banner at the bottom that I think says a very similar sample of text, just with modified for this video has been altered or modified through the use of computer programs.
Okay, but the language about something that didn't happen, does that have to be there as well?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a for example because I had an idea that I wanted to try to use. And you tell me if that's prohibited, allowed, but still need the disclosure. So I want to shoot a video, and on that video, I want to set and use voice modulating software as well as the image of my mouth moving, because Adobe already has software that can do this. After I believe it's 45 minutes of watching you talk, it can manipulate your mouth, the voice, everything to sound as if you're saying it in your own voice. So I want to create a video that says, "Hi, X, how are you doing today? I want you to vote for me." And instead of X, it's whatever person I'm sending it to via my email list, via Facebook, whatever. Does that have to meet the disclosure?
As the language in the bill states, yes, because in that hypothetical, you had not actually said what you had been saying. Even if it is with positive intent, it had not happened in reality, so it would be required to have that disclosure.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Ebersol.
One of the, I'm reading, and there's a section at the top of page 3 on the third reader reprint, which has who it applies to and who it doesn't. There's a lot of citations of other sections here, and I was going to cross-reference them. I thought maybe even the elevator version of who this applies to and who it does not apply to.
It applies to campaign entities in terms of who is defined as operating under a campaign, if they're spending campaign funds, if they are a candidate themselves, if they are representing the candidate, they would be subject to the parameters established in this bill. This section does not apply to third-party media groups or websites that a copy of an image could be shared on in terms of news or sharing of examples on social media.
Do you count PACs as campaign entities in this case?
I'm a pass it
Here
over
he
to Jared.
comes, here he comes.
Jared to the rescue.
I knew I could ask a hard
Sure.
question to get him up here.
So Jared Demaris, State Administrator of Elections for the record. So it applies to candidate committees, all campaign finance entities that are currently registered with us, which is PACs, slates, but it also includes independent expenditure groups, people that make electioneering communications. So outside groups that are trying to influence the election. So it will apply to the same groups that have to file those reports. They would be in this, as well as any of their agents that work for them as well. So they couldn't necessarily hire an influencer on social media to, disseminate a video at their behest. That would be covered under this. The exemption here that it does not apply to is the same language that we use for independent expenditure groups and electioneering communications. So this is we've basically made sure that it mirrors other parts of the election law article to be similar in its, exemptions.
Thank you. So I heard you mention independent expenditure groups, both in the included and discluded. So
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
It's the for an independent expenditure, we don't include news stories, commentaries, the things that would be in the press. And so this is that's not an independent expenditure. This is also doesn't apply to that if the press does something on their news programs or anything like that, that they have to abide by these rules. This is not to influence voters. They're just press organizations. So it meets the constitutional muster of excluding press entities from being overbroad.
And exploratory committees as well would be included, right?
Exploratory committees are not currently a regulated industry, so it's not there.
So an exploratory committee could produce something like this and not put a disclosure on it then? Under this bill, if this bill were to become law?
Well, since exploratory committees are not a defined term of art in Maryland, except in regulations, then yes, it's not covered under it.
Okay, when exploratory committee raises money though, and I believe we declare with you, I've never had an exploratory committee. I just jumped in with both feet. But how does that work with you? And
I think that's another bill that's going to be heard.
Okay, thank you.
A little
I'm
bit later
throwing
about
down too far.
exploratory committees and draft committees. And I just wanted to also make a note on Delegate Hornberger's point as well. If you look at the definition of synthetic media, it talks about fundamentally making a fundamental impression that's different from what occurs in reality as well. So the idea maybe of having your voice, putting a different voice in there, it would not be a fundamentally altering a person's voting decision or casting a vote. Just like I would say, touching up a photo, a little like, shadowing or anything like that doesn't fundamentally change like the image that is there. But if it's something where they're saying words that necessarily do not ever occur, or trying to move, I would say, a voter in a pattern such as like the Joe Biden that he had mentioned earlier, or other deep fakes that did not occur in reality, then that's something where that would be covered, and that the disclaimer would be a part of that.
making me taller would be out, right?
Okay, Delegate Ebersol,
Wish I was something.
thank you. Delegate Hornberger to follow up, then Delegate Young.
Yes, thank you. And that's why I wanted to get down to the granularity of this. So a filter, for example, on Instagram, a touch up, a deleting someone from the photo, these wouldn't fall under the auspice of your bill.
I would say deleting someone of a photo might be a fundamentally, giving an impression that, it depends on who the person is, right? I mean,
Sure.
you could have a photo with Adolf Hitler next to you and, you know, you would want to delete that person from that. But, you know, so I would say that the deletion, I would say could have you know, it would have maybe a fundamentally different understanding of the impression that of the individual and what's going on. But the touch up, not necessarily that's going to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I would just say as more of a comment than anything else, you know, these phones, these devices that use inherently have changes built into them. In other words, I'm not taking an exact copy of an image. We got rid of those cameras 30 years ago. The concern that I have, and maybe you can answer this, is that if I want to be in a risk mitigation world, every piece of media that I put out after this bill passes, I'm going to stick that disclaimer on there. So I mean, what you know, if I want to be 100% certain that I'm compliant, anything that I put out, video, image, short of just pure text, I mean, what would your comment be to that? And that's where I don't know where we draw the line on what qualifies or what doesn't. In this business that we're in, just the accusation of producing something that is duplicitous or deep fake, or just the accusation can be hurtful, especially in a campaign, in the throes of a campaign 2 weeks out from the voting day. So as a result, do I just stick this on everything to cover my basis? What would your thoughts be on that?
So I would like to turn your attention to page 2, where we define what constitutes synthetic media, which I think is going to be the definition that we'll be applying to use cases within this scenario. Specifically, 2 aspects being that the use of synthetic media attempts to influence the casting of a vote or a decision by vote. So the intent behind how you're using it, as well as producing a fundamentally different understanding or impression of an individual's appearance, speech, or conduct. So it would have to be fundamentally different. I think the slight modifications or touch-ups would not strictly constitute use of synthetic media.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Delegate Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think I want to get straight to that point that you just mentioned. And I think that's also where my confusion lies right now. Because we just talked about if I made, for instance, a robocall with AI, that would need to be disclosed. But I question where the fundamental difference would be from my voice had I recorded it myself, or if I used 11 Labs, typed it up, and used the dub of my voice. Where's the fundamental difference, and how would that apply here?
If it was your voice being modified slightly in terms of clarifying the audio, tuning it up, I do not think that would constitute synthetic media, as it would not be a fundamentally different or synthetically created where it was imitated to sound like your voice. If it was generated through the use of artificial intelligence computer programs, then it would constitute the use of synthetic media. So it's the difference of being entirely fabricated versus slightly adjusted for quality.
And I think entirely fabricated really speaks to the first point in the definition. So the other question I have, well, 2 more questions, Madam Chair. The first one has to do with, you know, folks on the committee know I have all the VR headsets, all the tech. And in the new Vision Pro, you have what's called a persona, where, you know, it records your face, and, you know, I could take FaceTime calls, Teams calls, interviews, etc. And it's literally, it looked like me, but you know, you kind of know it's AI. In that circumstance, were I to, for instance, have, say, a call with an advocacy group and do that call through the Vision Pro, and thus they're talking to my persona, we record it, we put it out as a campaign video, would that require disclosure? And in that instance, I'm actually the one talking, the cameras are catching me, but what's seen is the persona.
That's a very good question.
Well, I guess, I mean, that's a fact-based question, and you know, whether or not it would have to go with the state prosecutor on that. But I guess it also has to go into, it's not producing a fundamentally different understanding of your appearance or conduct that a reasonable person would have understood, right? So you're still trying to promote your candidacy, or you're going out there with it. What this is really attempting is, say, taking your image and then having it sent into to your supporters and creating a completely different perception of you. So when you're producing your own stuff, and I think this is where, that's why it's the fundamentally different understanding. That is, you know, you're speaking and you're supporting and promoting your own candidacy in that scenario there. It's not, a reasonable person would say that that is you speaking and that is your voice behind it, and it still has your authority behind it. So you're taking ownership of that. What it is trying to get at here is that if it's a person that was saying, taking your image and creating a completely fabricated type of understanding to influence voters to not vote for you, that's where the authority line would have to come in and start saying, this is, I own that material, and that did not occur in reality. And that then the voter, if they looked at it, can go, oh, let me see what actually did occur in reality, because then it will be on that person's website for them to look at. So then they can make their own decision as to whether or not they believe or don't believe you would have said something to that nature. And I think that this is where the kind of the rubber meets the road on this legislation, is that when you're looking at what you're doing for yourself, it's not creating that different understanding to the voter to influence them to not go to the polls or not to vote for you. That's you're creating your own image. It's when other people, outside groups, or your opponents, or agents of them that try to create this and use it for deceptive or I would say improper purposes.
I think I get that point, and I thank you for making it plain. But in both scenarios, it's what I would determine is a reflection of me, clearly identified candidate. It purports to depict a real, clearly identified candidate. That's part of the definition in both circumstances. So I would actually seek more clarity, and I wouldn't want us to get to the state prosecutor. I think that's where you see myself and Delegate Hornberger. Like, we don't, just to even thought of having to get there becomes a problem. So that's where we're trying to make sure that us, even when we're doing our own thing, and our colleagues the same way, aren't getting caught up with having to deal with the state prosecutor. My last question has to do with, you mentioned media, and I noticed in the amendments that a lot of the media piece was taken out. You mentioned it was an overbroad piece and constitutional question. Can you restate that again? I'm really concerned also, certainly, about certain media organizations, particularly in my city, who may do a lot of things with the AI.
Right.
And so can we just
So
evaluate
yes,
that a little more?
so on page
Thank you,
3, they basically, that this section does not apply to any news story, commentary, editorial by a broadcast system there, website, newspaper, magazine, or any periodical. So it's the same language that we use to exclude them from being caught up under independent expenditure articles or their publications, or electioneering communications. So this is kind of the same language that has survived that structure at this point here. So it would be the same.
What I'm specifically asking about is, why is it overbroad to include them? If they are a bad actor, then why wouldn't we want them and need them to be under the same law with a disclosure as well? Why are we removing the disclosure requirement for a media entity merely because they're a media entity? What makes it overbroad?
Because media entities have special constitutional protections under the First Amendment. And council can attest to when we try to go after them a little bit with our social media platform. The Fourth Circuit was with the Washington Post suing the State Board of Elections when we attempted to do anything in enforcing them in disclosing or any of their activities. So I would say that they are protected under the First Amendment, and we've had.
Thank you for taking my questions, and thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair and Committee.
Okay, Delegate Long.
Madam Chair, the question I have is, given the technology that we have that would be used to influence a campaign in a negative manner, up to, let's say, a week away from the campaign or election, something's done, what remedies will the Board of Elections do if it calls the election to be changed? And that's what I'm trying to say.
So I guess the thing is right now, the same sort of scenario can occur today, right? I mean, let's just say that there's a lit drop that comes out the day before the election, or, there's robocalls that come out on election day. We've had this in the past where, you don't go out to vote, there are things that we have some ability to act immediately on this with the Secretary of State. And here there's also the ability to, I believe, seek an injunction on the publication or distribution, and that's on page 6 and 5 of the bill there. So there's some immediate actions that we can do to that, but overall, it's the same sort of reality that we exist currently. Like, we're not, the impact of it can swing the election. But there would be consequences afterwards, just like in today. But we're not going to undo the election or move forward.
All right, one last question. If bad actors are out here doing this, and they don't put this disclosure in there, then how do you identify and how are they prosecuted?
So the same thing that we have with bad actors that on anonymous pieces of literature that get distributed currently. We work closely with the state prosecutor's office and they do investigations to find out who goes on with robocalls. They track down and investigate to see how they were bought and what numbers are used. And we have a very good state prosecutor's office, and we work closely with them to make sure that the rules are complied with.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you very much. Tell Senator Hester you certainly earned your pay today, so thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 978. Senator Kagan, Senate Bill 494.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, colleagues. I just have to say that I think I speak for us all that I have a really heavy heart today. And but democracy goes on, and I've got 3 bills. You said 494 first, Madam Chair? Excellent. For the record, Senator Cheryl Kagan, very proud to represent the residents of Gaithersburg and Rockville. This one is going to be super quick unless you have questions. Senate Bill 494 is the precise cross-file with Delegate Fair. This has already passed the House, and it just is compliant with federal legislation to make sure that our post-electoral college process goes smoothly and that Maryland will never have a problem with fake electors or duplicate lists that are going. So there was a modest amendment that was basically a typo that clarified the process, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 494, Senate Bill 495.
495, Madam Chair, may seem a little familiar because I brought it to last year, also passed unanimously in the House. And it just allows our voters to be better informed before they cast their ballot. In 2022, over 400,000 Marylanders voted for governor and did not vote in one or more of the ballot measures. If we're seeking democracy and we're seeking voter engagement and we're asking their opinions on issues that we have put before them, I think we ought to make sure that they understand. And sometimes I think we speak above their heads and confuse them. And so they're either skipping it or they are persuaded by interest groups. So I want to read you briefly and quickly 2 different ballot measures that were on our most recent ballots. In 2022, quote, 133 words, quote, adds to the eligibility requirements to serve as a senator or a delegate to the Maryland General Assembly by requiring a person to have maintained a primary place of abode in the district that the person has been chosen to represent. Under current law, a person must have resided in the district to which the person has been elected for at least 6 months immediately preceding the date of the person's election, or if the district has been established for less than 6 months prior to the date of election, as long as the district has been established. The new law requires, beginning January 1st of 2024, a person must have both resided in and maintained a primary place of abode in the district for the same periods of time as under current law. That was question number 2. The contrast is question number 4, which simply asked voters, our constituents, quote, do you favor the legalization of the use of cannabis by an individual who is at least 21 years of age on or after July 1, 2023 in the state of Maryland? I think we can do better than long legalese that confuses people. The bill as passed in the Senate simply requires that all ballot questions be accessible to people under the plainlanguage.gov if they have a 6th grade education. Now, it may be, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, colleagues, that you all have a different idea and you think 6th grade is too basic. There is 8th grade. There is plain and accessible language. I want to let you know, okay, New York, 8th grade reading level is New York. 10th to 12th grade was developed during a reading ease test developed for the US Navy, and that was passed in Alaska. There are word limits. A maximum 500 word summary in Virginia, max 25 words in Oregon, Louisiana, Michigan, New York all have caps as well. Specifically banning the use of legal terminology, that's Mississippi. Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas specifically just said that the summary has to be easily understood. And many other states, 22 other states have these laws. 22 states just said must prescribe plain language in an unquantifiable way, clear and unambiguous language. So I think this is important for democracy. I think it's important as we figure out how we can engage our constituents and give them the confidence that they need in order to cast an informed vote on our ballot questions. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 495, Senate Bill 458, and you have Morgan Drayton.
Always good to have common cause with you. So I'll kick off. Again, Cheryl Kagan presenting about scam packs, which was also sponsored in the House by our great delegate Polakovich Carr. And this is a new and growing issue. We have gotten warnings from the FBI, from the Federal Election Commission, that these phony organizations ripping off our constituents are around, are growing, and we need to give a tool to our State Board of Elections to make sure that they can issue subpoenas and make sure that there is more transparency. I want to read 3 quick examples, Madam Chair. In Catonsville, a scammer raised over $1 million by promising people a non-existent chance to have dinner with Donald Trump. In Annapolis, a scammer raised more than $20 million allegedly on behalf of Ken Cuccinelli. Not a dime of that money went to the candidate. And finally, in Montgomery County, a scammer created a PAC to support, allegedly, volunteer firefighters and raised $4.6 million. None of the money went to first responders. We've got to make sure we crack down on these folks. These are people who use independent expenditures only. These are not labor unions. These are not business organizations. These are not the folks who support us that we work with every day. These are phony baloney groups looking to rip off folks, and we need to be able to crack down. So happy to take questions either before or after the wonderful Ms. Drayton. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the committee. My name is Morgan Drayton. I'm here on behalf of Common Cause Maryland in strong support of SB 458, which, as we just heard, increases transparency requirements around scam packs and also empowers the Maryland Comptroller and the State Board of Elections to fully investigate any future violations as they happen. As we just heard, scam packs are entities that raise money purportedly to help candidates win their campaigns. However, instead of actually spending those funds on the candidate, the PAC effectively pockets that money And as we just heard, it's oftentimes a lot of money. Without knowing the signs, it's very easy to mistake a scam pack for a legitimate charity or a political group. And we've unfortunately seen quite a few examples of scam pack organizers using loopholes in our campaign finance law to exploit Marylanders who are very earnestly seeking to engage in our political process. This legislation takes those necessary steps to protect Marylanders and provides tools for the relevant bodies to investigate and prevent wrongdoing. So for those reasons, we would urge a favorable report on SB 458 and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Delegate Hornberger.
And definitely appreciate the posture of both of these bills. They're fantastic. Some of these entities have gotten very creative with what they do with the money. And that's kind of wanted to pose something that recently happened, whereas one of these groups took the money that they raised and then purchased a few 100,000 copies of their own book that they had also published. So it's sort of like a multi-step money laundering operation. So I think this bill seeks to do some sort of auditing mechanism. But what would that, in that instance that I just shared with you, what would that look like? Would that be permissible? Because as these things go on, they get more and more sophisticated.
Thank you, Delegate Hornberger. So one of the things that's clear is that we can't have self-dealing.
Right.
So whether I'm raising money and pocketing it, which some folks do, or I'm hiring my best friend as an accountant for this firm,
Yep.
and again, passing the money kind of within the family, we've got to make sure that there is transparency. And again, this is a growing problem.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 458. Senator Carter, Senate Bill 733, and you have Stephen Janis.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee. It's an honor and a privilege to be before this esteemed committee today. My first time all session. I'm also thrilled to be bringing you what I think is a great bill that everyone will see favorably. I'm joined by two documentarians, Taya Graham and Stephen Janis. They made the documentary film Tax Broke, which really was a premise for the bill that I'm bringing to you today. We did email links to that documentary to you that you can watch for free if you see it in your email, and I'd strongly advise everyone to watch it. It's very informative. And so all of this session, we have all heard that we don't have any money. Money's not flowing like it used to, and we have to tighten our belts, and we're faced with, the possibility and potentiality of tax increases and where we can cut. But what this bill does is gives us other potential revenue ideas, because it would ultimately, while it does create a task force, the idea behind it and creating a task force to arrive at transparency is that we could see where our tax incentives are going, and if there are ways that we can modify and alter them so that we can frankly create a better system and a more fair system in Maryland. And so I'm going to briefly go through some of my testimony, but again, the bill simply creates a task force. It's about good governance and transparency. I'm sure that my witnesses will talk more about some of the findings they've had on some of the tax incentives and the tens of millions of dollars that have been expended on them with no real monitoring or no real transparency as to whether or not they realize their intended purposes or whether they actually benefit the jurisdictions that they are ostensibly designed to benefit. So the economic landscape of Maryland demands that we take bold and proactive measures to bolster growth, attract investment, and enhance competitiveness in a way that benefits our entire state. Establishing a tax incentive task force is not just advisable, it's imperative. Maryland must seize the opportunity to harness the full potential of its tax incentives to drive sustainable development and foster an environment that allows businesses of all kinds to succeed in the state. Tax incentives wield immense power in shaping economic behavior. They serve as critical tools to incentivize desired actions, whether it's revitalizing blighted areas, attracting high growth industries, or paying the utility cost of sports stadiums. However, these tax incentives at the same time create strong opportunity costs that future generations will have to pay for. Marylanders have a right to know how these tax incentives will impact them and their children, who will undoubtedly be the future generation most impacted by haphazard tax gifts. The efficacy of these incentives hinges on their judicious design and implementation. A dedicated task force can meticulously evaluate the impact of existing incentives, identifying strengths, weaknesses, and areas that need improvement. Furthermore, distorted evaluation processes across various tax incentive programs create inefficiencies and breed confusion. We simply seek a uniform, standardized evaluation framework to ensure that there is transparency, accountability, and equitable distribution of benefits. I believe this is a really strong first step in kind of weeding through the maze of secrecy and non-transparency that most of these tax incentives enjoy. And so with that, I'm happy to, with my panelists, possibly answer questions, but I'd love to hear from them. I know that only one of them was signed up to testify, and so I will ask them to choose if possible.
Yeah, you go ahead. Taya's just going to testify, and I'll be here to answer questions.
I am so grateful to the esteemed members of the House to speak in support of the task force to study transparency and tax incentives. We're here to discuss the vital matter of transparency and tax incentives, and it's imperative to acknowledge the intrinsic importance of public access to information. In the case of withholding such information, it should be the lack of disclosure that necessitates justification, not the request. Transparency is the cornerstone of democratic governance, and it should unfailingly prioritize the public interest. The establishment of this task force marks a significant step towards fostering accountability and trust. The public's right to know how their tax contributions are utilized cannot be understated. And when a deferral of these tax contributions is permitted, a TIF or a pilot or a Brownsfield credit, the public has a right to know the whys and the hows of the benefit it provides them. And of course, Stephen Janis and I can testify in depth as to how difficult it is to access this data. By studying the use and performance of tax incentives, identifying appropriate performance metrics, and collecting data from the past 5 years, this task force will be able to provide valuable insights into the efficacy and impact of tax incentive programs. There are recommendations with long-term benefits for data collection, and there is suggested implementation of uniform reporting. And perhaps most importantly, for the confidence of your constituents, the creation of a public database for accessibility. I would assert that if you receive tax subsidies and the privilege of deferring property taxes, you must be subject to heightened scrutiny. Every resident has a right to understand how developer actions impact taxpayer funds and the city's well-being, and we shouldn't be afraid of revealing the successes or the failings of these tax credits. As a lifelong Maryland resident and as a member of the media, I commend the establishment of this task force, and I hope the bill's mandate is pursued. We can ensure that the taxpayers' interests remain paramount with this kind of transparency. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And question, Delegate Buckle.
Sure. And Senator, I appreciate the bill. I think it's probably really get some merit to it. What was the rationale between behind how you selected the tax incentives that would be the subject of the task force? So we have the Tax Expenditure Evaluation Act that sort of does some of this, maybe doesn't do it as well, but DLS does evaluate a wide variety of the statewide tax credits and job creating tax credit programs. TIFs and pilots are sort of really not tied necessarily usually to job creation, but they're development incentives, so to speak, and the Brownfields Revitalization Incentive Program. What was the rationale between the four that you chose for the task force, particularly since the enterprise zone property tax credit does get studied by DLS periodically under the Tax Credit Evaluation Act? Is there some link between those four that makes them different from other things that you want to particularly focus on?
Selecting those particular ones was really largely based on the documentary Tax Broke and some of the findings that were revealed in that. And so for that if you don't mind, I'm gonna let
Sure.
Steve and Janice elaborate on some of the things they found in the way that these incentives.
Okay.
Thank you, Delegate, for the question. The reason that we focus on those in our documentary is because they're the most widely used in Baltimore City and had the greatest amount of impact on the tax revenues of the city. So, and just incidentally, the Harbor Point pilot, Harbor Point TIF, for example, did include job reports that came with it because there was the expectation that the TIF would create jobs at Harbor Point because we had, the Exelon headquarters, which is located there. But the main reason that we chose those was because those are the ones that kept coming up in the data that we could find that were most, I would say, affecting the underlying tax revenues of the city. So those had the biggest impact. So we focused on those and those seem to be most closely tied to development, and they had evolved in some sense because, for example, pilots used to have to be approved by the city council. Now pilots are by right, and pilots in themselves weren't supposed to really be a development incentive. They're supposed to be payment in lieu of taxes for nonprofits that were normally nonprofits. So the idea was we just took the ones that had the biggest impact, that were costing the most money, that were the hardest to get the answers on, and included those. And so that's why we focused on them.
Okay. And sometimes, so I know you really focused on the city, and the city has some massive TIF projects that have that they've approved to do development. But do you have any position as to these things in other places? So like for a pilot, I know where I live, in Allegheny County, the biggest pilot is actually the Rocky Gap Casino.
Right.
Because they're located on state land. So there was a legal determination that perhaps they wouldn't have to pay property taxes because technically they're just renting, they have a ground lease.
Right.
And they agreed to a pilot as part of the plan to site them there. And it brings in, hundreds of thousands of $1 million a year in funds. So your analysis, I think it was very centered on what's going on in the city and with some of the city's budgetary woes and some of the TIFs that maybe haven't met the expectations.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that, as you pointed out, the brownfields credit was studied in 2021, but none of these other have studied in any jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So as reporters, we can only do so much. But I think it's worthwhile to all the taxpayers of the state to know if they're being used in the ways that are used to spur development or other things, that those taxpayers deserve answers. Yes, I do. I do support that.
So TIFs and pilots, at least in my experience, I do some development law. TIFs and pilots are usually things determined by local jurisdictions as opposed to things that we do, like, statewide tax credits, job tax credits.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate that and where you're coming from. Thank you for the information.
Thank you, Delegate.
Are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee.
That-
Enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully it will go as quickly.
That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 733. Is anyone here from Senator Augustine's office? Senate Bill 557. Okay, we'll skip over that. Josh Greenberg, please come up. Senate Bill 286.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, Josh Greenberg on behalf of the Department of Assessments and Taxation. So this is a bill that you guys have previously passed out of this committee. The Senate sent it over with one pretty significant amendment. It would basically allow certain applicants to retroactively qualify for the previous 2 years of the homeowner's tax credit, homestead tax credit, instead of just the previous 1 year. So the portion of the bill that is still effective and remains unchanged in both versions of the bill is the version that would just include the homeowners protection program enrollees in a program that allows them to retroactively qualify both for the homeowners tax credit and to extend the deadline for their application. The extension of the homestead tax credit, that would essentially allow HPP enrollees under this bill and homeowners tax credit recipients over 70 to qualify for the previous 2 years of the homeowners tax credit. So we appreciate the amendment. We agree with it. We like the spirit of it. The only change that we would really request is to make sure that the original intent of the first bill that allowed people to previously qualify for the homestead tax credit be preserved with a technical clarifying amendment that said If you want to qualify for the previous 2 years of the homestead tax credit, you have to either be someone who's eligible for the homeowners and over 70 or an enrollee in the homeowners protection program. So favorable with amendments and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill
Thank you.
286. Mr. Greenberg. Oh no, Justin Hayes is presenting. Come on up, please. Senate Bill 677.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members in the committee. My name is Justin Hayes. I'm the Director of State Affairs for the Comptroller's Office. Thanks for giving me the time today to discuss Senate Bill 677. This legislation establishes a timeline for individuals and businesses with more than 15 full-time employees who will need to file and pay their taxes online. There are several reasonable exceptions built into this bill. There are exceptions listed for seniors 65 years and older, single filers with incomes below 200,000, or joint filers or widows with a dependent child with an income below $400,000. Additionally, Marylanders with religious objections and Marylanders with disabilities. Our team worked to be as intentional as possible about these exemptions, including getting stakeholder feedback and working through scenarios that may arise to ensure that our agency is being as thoughtful as possible in this transition. And I want to just give a shout out to committee staff for their hard work on these amendments. I know it was a laborious process, so thank you, Stan. And I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity for my testimony to be heard. And as this legislation received a favorable report from this committee earlier in the session, I respectfully request a favorable report on SB 677.
Okay, are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 677. Senator Augustine, welcome. Senate Bill 557. And do we have Councilwoman Fisher virtually?
All right.
Whenever you're ready, we'll check
Okay.
and see if she's.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Senator Malcolm Augustine here on behalf of Senate Bill 557, election law, polling places, procedures, individual assisting a voter. Folks, I just got to kind of give you some of the context of why I brought this piece of legislation forward. We all know when we're at a polling location, it's always just the funniest of things. And a voter will come by and there'll be two candidates there and stuff like that. And they'll tell us, hey, I voted for you, right? And they do that, right? And we know how that feels. But they know who they voted for because they, by themselves, in that ballot box, get the opportunity to make the decision that they want to make without others being there to coerce them or to do anything else like that. So what occurred and what I observed and how this piece of legislation came apart was a case where an individual who actually happened to be the spouse of a candidate, actually, which is even more egregious, quite frankly, was using our state law, which is there to protect people and make sure that they are fully enfranchised, by saying that if you have a disability or if you are unable to read and write English, that you are able to have someone to assist you when you are voting. But that when you do that, you have to come up and you got to say, hey, yeah, I'm here. And the two people have got to sign for that. So what was happening, folks, is that this individual, realizing that that was the case, was literally bringing people who, by the arm, and walking them into the voting booth, getting them to sign, and in essence, voting multiple times because of the way that the law was written. They were able to go in, given this part of the law, and be right there with the person actually in the place for marking the ballot, time and time again. And for me, obviously, my concern is that when a person is in there, we got to make sure that they are able to have their ability to vote the way that they want to vote without feeling coerced. They coming in there with somebody who knows how they really wanted to vote. you know, like I said with my example, folks say what they want to say, but then they get the choice to do that. In this instance, over and over and over again, this individual was bringing folks in, preventing them from talking to anyone, and in essence, taking multiple votes with that person. Now, the thing is, raise the issue to the elections judges who were there. And what the election judges said was, this is wrong. This is not the spirit of what we would like to see, but there's no, based on the law, there's no sort of violation that's occurring here. And that's the genesis of this piece of legislation. I did reach out to, and he's here, for the chair at the Board of Elections, asking sort of like, what's the right sort of, just technically speaking. It's very narrow. It's about the marking actually of the ballot, which is that instance inside of the, when you're actually doing it. It's got nothing to do with the ability to bring people to the polls or to help to do this and that. No, nothing. It literally is just that small piece. It also allows that election judges are not subject to a cap of 3 unrelated people. It also allows that if you are related, it's your family member, you know, you're able to do that. You're able to help them to do that. But it really is, this piece of legislation really is targeted at making sure that we actually not infringe on people's rights, but actually protect individuals' rights, and that we protect the integrity of our elections. And it's important. And that's this legislation. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Thank you.
We're gonna let Councilwoman Fisher go. Whenever you're ready, ma'am, Madam Councilwoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you to the great Ways and Means Committee of the House of Delegates. I want to thank Chair Atterbury and Vice Chair Wilkins for having me today. And especially I want to thank my Senator Malcolm Augustine, for bringing this legislation forward. I wanted to join you all. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. I had to be virtual. We have council meetings today. But I wanted to really explain, Senator Augustine did a great job of what I also saw at the polls the last election cycle. And I think it's really important to know that, you know, we all support voter assistance, but it has to have some guardrails. And I think when you see an individual part of a campaign go over and over and over multiple days, literally taking a campaign shirt on, flipping it inside out to go inside to assist people in a way that is overbearing, it makes you question, is that actually voter assistance? And as Senator Augustine said in his testimony, I think there just needs to be some guardrails about how many individuals and how often you can do that. As you all know, elections are won and lost by a few people. I'm blessed that I've always had very large margins, but you know, it can be tight. And so we have to be really, really careful about making sure that there are guardrails in place and that legislation actually follows the spirit of what we all want to see to protect folks as they're going to vote and as they're enjoying that right and that ability. I also think it's really important to know there's a lot of scenarios. You know, I was just with my seniors and I was thinking about, well, what if a campaign pays somebody who works in a senior home and they go there and voter assist every single person in that building? There's nothing in the law that actually helps protect that and put some guardrails in there. So I think assistance is important, and I hope we can find ways to put guardrails in our system. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions. We will start with Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator, for bringing this bill. I think we all agree, and as you started out with your testimony and the councilwoman started out with her testimony, that we all support and understand the need for voter assistance, especially for people with disabilities and those who speak a different language. I actually wanted to get a little bit granular around the current process and rules around voter assistance. So I wanted to ask Mr. Demarinis if he could come up to help answer a few questions and make sure that we fully understand how it can work. And I wanted to And thank you so much, Mr. Demarinis. If you want
Sure.
to state your name for the record.
Jared Demarinis, the State Administrator of Elections.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand, when we are at the polls and someone comes in, if you can walk us through what the actual rules are and the process is. I know there's a form they have to fill out. If you can
Yes.
just kind of go through how the process works.
Sure, a voter, when they go to the polls and requires assistance in marking or preparing the ballot because of a physical disability or inability to read English, they can choose any individual that they want to help assist them in marking their ballot. There are, of course, they can't choose their employer or their agent of their employer, or an agent or employer of the voters union. Those are the only exceptions to that rule. But basically, at that point there, they can choose any individual. And by the way, when it says individual, it can mean of any age as well. That's the term there. So that's what is currently in law to help assist those voters to cast a ballot. There is no, I would say, limit on the number of times that individual can assist other voters, or what relationships that they can, what other familia or any sort of relationships that they have with candidates or to campaigns.
For the person providing the assistance though, is there's a form or something they have to fill out to attest?
Yes.
Or
So they just have to just sign that they helped with the individual at the polling place. So that's it. The same thing we do with mail-in voting, right? Like if I help deliver or take your ballot, there's a form that like the voter required assistance, and you have to fill out that form as well. This is the same thing. At the polling place, you would have to fill out a form. It's just basically your name saying that I assisted this voter.
And is the voter filling out their own, is there any rules on, is the voter filling out their own form, or is the person filling it out for them? Are there any rules on that?
No, I would say that the individual would have to sign that they would basically, that this person assisted them. And because it depends on the physical disability, right? I mean, if the physical disability is I can't write it out, so then the person would write out the form and sign the form and move forward with it. But but both the voter and the individual's names would be on the form filled out as to who assisted the
Got
voter.
it. So depending on the type of disability or the situation, it's possible perhaps that someone could be helping them to fill it out.
Exactly.
But it's clear in law that cannot tell someone how to vote or.
Yes,
Okay.
right, that is correct. Yes.
All right, well, thank you for the clarifications. I wanted to make sure we understood a baseline of how the voter assistance works. I think, Senator, this is a really important bill and I appreciate you bringing it. So thank you.
Delegate Miracle North.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill. I'm trying to picture the pattern, because I heard, this being done over a couple of days. I was envisioning within a particular few hours. So what pattern of assistance are we trying to target? Because I see you can't assist any more than 3 voters. Let's say it's election day. I happen to be volunteering for a campaign. I do the 7 a.m. shift, the noon shift, the 8 o'clock shift. I happen to help 3 people that day or 4 people. Okay.
Yeah.
Versus someone who's like the 8 to 9 shift and they're helping several people. That's more of a problem to me. But when I see over the course of several days, I'm like, is that really a problem? So can we just get a clarification on what pattern you're trying to address with this bill?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So this is not just your sort of run-of-the-mill helping someone, like bringing someone to the poll. It has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with that. Most folks they might get assistance to be brought there. And then there is that place where you have to stop as a campaign person. You don't go inside that space, and the voter is now given a safe space to be able to exercise their right to vote. In this instance, this is where the individual accompanies the person inside of that space, goes into the elections judge and says to the elections judge, I'm here to help, or the person says this person's here to assist me with voting. And that's where the signature would occur, which is different than simply providing sort of assistance. It's an additional step. It's a protection to help people with disabilities, people who aren't in our law cannot read or write English. It's very specific on that. That would allow them for that person to then go with them into the actual location where you vote. And so that's what is different than a person who all of us, we do, where we stay outside of the boundary. We do what we can, we help people get there, and then the folks are able to go in and do that. That's where this is different. This is where a person is doing that. And so that's why it's different. And if you ask about the pattern in this instance, and the number may not be right. I mean, this is just a number right now. But the pattern was that throughout early vote, the person was steadily bringing individuals and walking them in, grabbed by the arm, unwilling to let people talk to the individuals, walking them in, getting them to sign, and then coming out the other side and laughing. That was the situation. Over and over and over again.
Okay, Delegate Vogel, quick question.
Very, very quick. Hello, Senator.
Hi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Why the number 3? That's
Yeah,
what I'm curious about.
There was no honestly, it simply was the number. I can't remember if I came to you with the 3 or not. I think maybe I have got the intent is not around the number at all. It really was around the practice, so it's more significant practice. And yeah, I don't have a good answer for you on why 3, honestly. Yeah.
Okay, seeing no further questions. Delegate Hartman for a very quick question. Last question.
Very quick, and whether the senator or the former delegate wants to answer this. So would we be auditing or reviewing the signed affidavits? Is that?
Yeah, you would have to, I mean, you would have to ask, obviously, the Board of Elections on how.
I mean, I guess at one point here, if there was a question or a complaint driven about like a person, like in this situation here, right? The senator called up and said, I think that this person is facilitating more than 3 people at the polling place, then we would go and look at those records.
So only if a challenge.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have 2 folks signed up.
Thank you, sir.
Joanne Antoine, unfavorable, and Gregory Brown. Please come up for 2 minutes each.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Gregory Brown from the ACLU of Maryland, opposing SB 557. There are several communities throughout the state of Maryland, specifically communities of color, the large majority of them being immigrant communities who rely on people in the community to assist them with voting. And a lot of the times, these people don't even feel confident if they do not have that assistance. And the main reason why this bill would be a net harm is because, one, it would discourage these communities from even practicing the right to vote if they feel they don't have that assistance. And the large part of it is that 3 seems to be an arbitrary number. and it's not clear to me how this would improve election security with the absence of any evidence that that this practice is widespread. The great thing about the state of Maryland is that we already have protections against this kind of behavior. In our law right now, it says that that people who are assisting with voting are prohibited from suggesting in any way how the voter should vote for a particular ticket, candidate, or position on a question. And while I appreciate the senator's scenario that he detailed, if he felt that this practice was rising to the level of being illegal, I believe that he should have alerted the state's attorney, and it could have been taken care of throughout the legal process. So being that in our view, this will be a net harm to communities of color and the disabled community, we urge an unfavorable report. Thank you.
For the record, Joanne Antoine with Common Cause Maryland, testifying in opposition of Senate Bill 557. We unfortunately did not get to weigh in the Senate, but wanted to make sure we were on the record, since we truly do believe this bill does more harm than good. When we look at the 2022 election cycle, for example, obviously, we, as an organization, we spend a great deal of time working in Prince George's County. Our 866R vote election protection efforts target that jurisdiction, and there were no reports from voters who were saying that they felt as though they were being taken advantage of when voting at the polls. We were fortunate to be able to debrief with Prince George's County election judges after that election, and none of them shared these concerns either, right? And I lift that up because at least for Prince George's County, we are not seeing that this is a jurisdiction-wide issue, and it's not a statewide issue or a trend that is being reported. I wanted to give two examples where, again, we'd be extremely limiting the work that even organizations like ours are able to do. When we're thinking of individuals who are incarcerated, who don't have access to election judges, who don't have access to election officials, many times if the facility provides us with permission, it is one or two of us that is able to go inside. In those instances, we are most certainly helping more than 3 individuals. Obviously, as someone who is Haitian American, who is bilingual, I spend a great deal of time working in communities with new citizens. I find myself as a paid employee of Common Cause assisting more than 3 individuals each election cycles. Even as someone that has worked on campaigns in the past, I've done diaspora engagement, and individuals have worked with me directly, again, because we've established a relationship and they trust me. We'd be, again, putting a lot of these individuals in situations where they're left with no choice but to work with election judges. And even though as a state, we're working to address language access issues and so forth, there's no guarantee that at a polling location, there's a judge that speaks that language to assist. So I close off in just saying this sounds more of a election judge training, where the judges need to confirm that, again, the individual wants to have assistance from this specific person, and that they trust the voter, the person assisting them, to vote in the way that they want it. So again, I urge an unfavorable report.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 557. That concludes the bill hearings for the Ways and Means Committee today. If you're in the back room, please go immediately back right now. Folks, we will be voting at 3:15, so please return at 3:15. Thank you.